Okay, so there was a question in the group on bone constraints, and I kind of just want to clarify a few things and how bone constraints work and what they are used for mainly. Okay, so first off, there was just an example of these two bones. One was set as a constraint, the other one it looked like was also a constraint, however, they're being controlled by the same bone. So let's go ahead and replicate exactly what was going on, and I'll explain why it was happening that way. Okay, so we made a bone layer, and in this bone layer, I'll just go ahead and do what I just did. It was already done. Um, so I just hit A on my keyboard, make a bone, and make another bone. Okay, so set up something like that. So what you're going to do is you're going to hit B on the keyboard or select bone, and you're going to select the bone. You're going to make the constraints. I'll just leave it at the default 70 by 70. And when I go and I use my manipulate bone tool, as you can see, this isn't set to anything. But there's also another issue. I have what's called bone strength on both of these. So if I go and I try to move any of these any direction using manipulate bones tool, it's going to move both bones because they have what's called this bone strength. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put down this bone strength, and I'm going to do the same thing, and it's going to give me the same result. However, the reason why it's moving back and forth is because this bone is not parented to anything. It's not the parent of this. Say we want it to be the parent of this, I would have to parent the bone. But before I do that, I just want to show you, if you hold Alt on the keyboard, hold Alt to rotate a single bone. These are usually for bones that aren't constrained, or that, excuse me, not constrained, but are not parented to other bones. So I'll go ahead and do that. And as you can see, the bone itself is moving. Now there's a reason why this bone is moving. Let's go ahead and go into our parenting. As you can see, this is the parent to the child bone here. Okay, so when I do move this one bone back and forth, let's go back to the manipulate bones tool, it is moving the child bone, the child that is connected to it. However, if I move the child bone alone by itself, it's moving because it's connected to the parent bone. Okay, so again, I don't have any bone strength off. My bone strength is completely down. But there was an example that I used, and I'll also post it back to the group, talking about inverse and forward kinematics. What this is an example of a inverse kinematic. Okay, it's the same as if I had this bone. I'll make a new example here. I'll click off both bones so none of them are highlighted, and I'll do this, this, and this. Okay, so this is the exact same example here of an inverse kinematic. This is as if this bone was moving this bone, except just imagine there's no bone tying the two together. This one's obviously still going to control this bone. Same thing. I'll go ahead and I'll take this out. So now this bone is the child of this bone, the parent. Okay, so whichever the arrow is going to, that's going to be the child to wherever that parent is that it's pointing to. So same thing. I move that around. It's going to give me the same result. Okay. All right, so now let's look at, okay, why is it important to use bone constraints in the first place? Well, I'm going to bring in a couple examples, and I'll make a few of my own as well. But first off, I'm going to bring in a character that I did called Dr. Cure. Actually, you know what? Let's see. Do I have any other ones? Lumberjack, Cat Lady. Darn it. I thought I did. So let me go back into my animations here, and okay, this one will work. Okay, so now this is kind of a little bit more complicated. Just take that out. Take the background out. Okay, so this bone, when I go to the bone, has quite a few different constraints there, and they all have their different rules that they play in. As you can see, they're all labeled. So I have open and close, width, height. But now I'm going to do something. I'm going to go to the bone constraints. So I'm going to the parents. And as you can see, none of these bones are parented to other bones. That is because these are what are called smart bones. Technically, what they constrain or what they control is, for example, this is the height. It's controlling the height of these 2 points of the mouth, the corner points of the mouth. So as you can see, the mouth goes up, mouth goes down. That's what that bone controls. So let's go to an example of that. Let's go ahead and set up real quick a mouth. So I'm going to go to my bone layer, and I'm going to select I'm going to make three layers, and I'm going to put all these layers into a group. So group with selection, and then I'll have my bones separate, okay, for now. Okay, so the layer, I'm going to label this mouth because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mouth mask, okay? So this is very simple to do. Every time that you're making a mouth, you're going to have the mouth or the black hole part of the mouth itself on the bottom, and then you'll do your teeth and the tongue and whatever other detail you want to put into the mouth on the top. So I've already made a tutorial on how to go over masks. So if you need to refer to that, please check my other tutorials. However, for this, I'll just make this real quick. I'll make it a black stroke, and I'm going to go into these 2 points, and I'm just going to fix that. Okay. So the next part is going to be the teeth real quick. I'm just going to do the same thing. Just do something real quick here. I'm going to do top teeth and bottom teeth. Okay. Oops. I'm just going to copy and paste this because I'm lazy. Okay. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get the tongue, and I'm just going to make a quick shape here real quick to make it look like a tongue. Okay. So there we go. So we basically have our mouth here. Okay. And now to make this into a actual mouth, I'm going to go hide all and apply. All right. So let me put at least some sort of kind of a face or something onto this, so it looks like it's not just the white background there. And I'll just put face, and I'm just going to put a blue head on, this face. I'll just do a blue square head, basically. Okay. So there we go. So that is the mouth. So I have the tongue in the wrong position. I actually need to position the tongue, the teeth over top of the tongue so it layers properly. Okay. All right. So now that I have all of that set up, now let's go into our bone layer and let's make a bone constraint for the mouth. Okay. So what we're going to do first is we're going to do what we already did. We're going to create a bone. Now with this bone, with all of your bone constraints, you want to make sure that there is no strength with these, okay? So right here, as you click on that, you see both bone strength. It says 1, I can hit 0, and it's gone, okay? Or you can just drag it left and right, and it does the same thing. Now, with Anime Studio 11 and I believe 10, you can now go to what's bone, make smart bone dial. And what it does is we're going to create now a smart bone. And a smart bone will also use constraints. We're going to use a constraint of what we did before. We're going to use, let's see here, 70 by 70. Okay. And I'll just set this on 24 frames. And there you go. So the 24 frames is how long it takes for that bone to turn to that location, which gives us more room to work with when we're opening and closing the mouth. Sometimes if you have less frames and you're trying to make a pretty broad movement with the mouth, it's going to be very jittery because it doesn't have enough of a timeline to work with, enough frames. B12 does the exact same thing. It takes 24 frames to move to that side. Okay, so that's basically how smart bone works. So we created the smart bone off of this bone here. This bone is called B1. So we have B1 to move to the left. And we have B1 space 2, that's what you have to call it. You always have to give it the same name, space 2, to move it the opposite direction. So we'll go ahead and we're going to make this B1 to the left open his mouth wider. So what you're going to do, so this is set up as a constraint. Now I can go back into this now and notice how, again, we don't have any parenting to this whatsoever. However, I can go into the manipulate bones tool and I can manipulate it. That is because it is now set up for a smart bone. If this was just set up as a constraint like we had before, I'm just going to make another example real quick. I'm just going to make my own constraint, and I'll show you why we usually use these types of constraints. I'm going to hit B on the keyboard, and I'm going to do the same thing, set the angles. Again, even if I take down the bone strength and I just try to move this, the reason why it's moving back and forth is because it's not tied to anything. There's not a bone-parent relationship, parent-to-child relationship connecting this bone. Again, that goes back to what's called your inverse kinematics, or IK chain, I believe is what they call it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that because now I think we got that example pretty much down. So I'm going to go back to the bone here, and now I know I can use this as a dial. That's what it's for. It's a dial to switch this mouth shape up using actions. So I'm going to hit Control K to bring up back my actions. Actions is found in Window Actions. This is the keyboard shortcut that I'm using. Okay, so now we have these two labeled B1 and B12. And now what we need to do in order for this bone layer to affect this vector layer, or this group down here, we need to move these both into this group called, we'll call this mouth bone. Okay, so you need to make sure that it is actually nested inside of that group. And if it's nested, you'll see because it's an indent and it disappears when you expand and close that little arrow there. Okay, so when I go now to my mouth bone, I'm going to click on B1, which is going to affect it going left. So we'll go ahead and make the mouth close. So you can see the bone is still active there. We're going to go ahead and close the mouth. Just a really simple animation. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my mouth bone and double click mainline. And now when I move this bone to the left, as you can see, it closes the mouth. And we'll go ahead and, oops, I didn't want to erase that by accident. Okay, so now I'm going to go to B12, and this is going to show that the bone's going to be moving the opposite direction. So let's go ahead and make it wider. Let's go ahead and make the mouth wider. Okay, so now I'm going to control the mouth so it goes wider. Obviously the mouth looks bad right now, so what we're going to do is we're going to move the teeth along with everything else. So we'll go back to the teeth, move the teeth up, move the teeth down, and also move the tongue down. So now when the mouth opens, technically your teeth wouldn't be moving like that, but this is just an example, very bad example actually. But so now when I go to frame 0, I can actually manipulate both the opened and closed mouth. And that is basically a what you would make use of a bone dial. There's a lot of different uses you can use them for, but this is just a quick example to show you how this works when using bone constraints, or in this case, we're calling this a bone dial. Okay, so I hope that clears the confusion on why the one bone was floating around the other, because when you just make regular bone constraints, you need to have it parented to something so that it constrains it, or it keeps it into one place. Whenever you're setting up a bone dial by going to bone, make smart bone dial, it's going to know that, okay, I'm going to be controlling, this bone knows that it's going to be controlling this action B1 and this action B2. What it does exactly, it doesn't know until you set it. So in this case, I made B1 when it goes to the left, close, and B2 when it goes to the right, open. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. If you have any more further questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section or on the group. Okay, so I hope that helps, and take care.